Okay, so here's the thing. We're halfway through the baseball season. For those of you who care. So you might have been expecting that I was going to reprise my baseball sermon. There have been a few requests. And actually, I realized the sermon title would work just fine. But that's not what I'm going to do. Another time, maybe. John Clark Ridpath, a historian, wrote a book called A Popular History of the United States of America. And I'm going to read you a quote from his conclusion to that volume. And I want you to think about when you think he was writing. Okay? This is what Ridpath says in his conclusion. What then of the outlook for the American Republic? What shall another century bring forth? How will the picture so well begun be completed by the analyst of posterity? Is the sad fate of humanity to turn forever round and round in the same beaten circle, climbing the long ascent from the degradation of savage life to the heights of national renown, only to descend again into the fenlands of despair? Is Lord Byron's gloomy picture of the rise and fall of nations indeed a true portrayal of the order of the world? And here he quotes Byron. Here is the moral of all human tales. 'Tis but the same rehearsal of the past. First freedom, then glory. When that fails, wealth, vice, corruption, barbarism at last. And history with all her volumes vast hath but one page. So when do you think this was written? Yesterday, no. 1890? 1856? 76. Early 1800s, okay. Well, in fact, it was written in 1877. Ridpath concludes that the achievements of the American people have far exceeded the expectations of the founding fathers. We could argue about that for a long time, but that was his experience in 1877. And so here we are in 2018, anticipating the 4th of July, the celebration of our independence as a nation. Remember, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And thus our forefathers declared that we are free and independent state. Unfortunately, the meaning of this freedom, which our ancestors fought and died for, is this today. The freedom to own as many guns as we choose, including military weapons. The freedom to discriminate against whomever we choose based on race or ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, or religion. The freedom to not pay taxes. The freedom to deny women control over our bodies. The freedom to deny asylum to those fleeing violence and oppression, and to take their children from them in the process. The freedom for politicians to lie repeatedly to the people. The freedom to deny some people the right to vote. The freedom to sexually harass people with no consequence. So you may have guessed I'm going to talk about politics today. Even though I know the cardinal rule of preaching is don't talk about politics. But I'm not going to talk about partisan politics. I don't think this is the time or place for that. But politics is about life, our life together, how we treat each other, how we make decisions, how we share resources, and these are spiritual as well as political issues. As a people today, as a nation today, we are facing an unprecedented crisis. The polarization of our people and our politics is extreme and is being exploited by many politicians. Our democracy is being undermined. Our fundamental values disregarded at nearly every turn. And we face a frightening vacuum of national leadership. Now, regardless of your political party, if you're not worried about this, you haven't been paying attention. But let's keep this in historical perspective. In 1860, our country was divided over the issue of the enslavement of people of African descent. And we fought a bloody civil war to resolve that issue. 100 years later, in the 1960s, we were again deeply divided over civil rights and an unjust war in Southeast Asia. And many of us remember those days clearly as we responded to those challenges. Today, some 60 years later, we are again deeply divided and our political and civil institutions are threatened. So the question before us on this 4th of July is the same posed by Ridpath and Lord Byron in 1877. Are we condemned to walk in this circle of freedom and glory, leading back to corruption and barbarism? This single page of human history. In other words, the same old, same old. So what does it mean for us as Christians, who, by the way, seem to be equally polarized as non-Christians? What does it mean for us as patriots, as people who love our country? What does it mean as patriotic Christians? So let's turn to the psalm for the day and consider. So at first reading of this psalm, it might appear to be a rather simplistic description of a polarized community. It's the we, they, and the we are specifically the good guys and the they are the bad guys. But there's actually more going on here, and it all turns on the first verse, do not fret. Do not fret. I don't think I've ever seen the word fret in Scripture before. And it actually only appears 5 times, and 3 of them are in this psalm. It's an unusual Hebrew verb. And I checked the 5 different English translations I had access to, beginning with King James, and they all translate it, do not fret. Which I'm curious, because I wouldn't have thought that 5 different English translations agreed on anything, but they agree on this. Now, I always thought that fret meant to worry or fuss about. And that's actually what Webster thinks too. Don't fret. Don't worry. But is this Psalm of David that simple? Just don't worry about the evildoers. Don't worry, be happy. Somehow that doesn't quite seem adequate for this time. So I called up my favorite rabbi in New York and asked him, what does this verb really mean? Not being a Hebrew scholar. And he said it actually means to despair or be angry, or to be envious. So this gets a little more interesting. Don't despair or get angry because of the of the wicked. Don't be tempted to be like them. Now, while many people are deeply worried about the state of our nation, I don't think most of us have considered being tempted to be like those who currently exercise power over us. But maybe we should pause to consider the temptation of power, because power can be tempting. The economy seems strong. The market is up. Unemployment is down. I'm not going to be deported. I don't need an abortion. I have health coverage. I don't have children. Why should I pay county taxes for the schools? Just don't look behind the curtain. Just drink the Kool-Aid and sell your soul. The temptation is real. But this psalm is a caution to all of us to watch out for that temptation to follow the path of the wicked. Do not fret is also do not despair or get angry. And I think this is about don't give them any energy. Don't let it eat you up from the inside. And that's hard. At least if you're still watching or listening to the news. Or watching The Handmaid's Tale on TV, which I am. So it's very hard not to despair and get angry. I don't know about you, but listening to Attorney General Sessions trying to explain the administration's policy to separate children from their parents at the border, as he tried to explain it, and then had the gall to justify this policy using Romans 13, sent me right over the edge. And he's a United Methodist, and the United Methodists were not pleased. I think they were mostly embarrassed. I despaired, I raged, but I will say on that one I was not tempted in the least to join him, because I saw how pathetic and incompetent he was. But how do we help each other survive these dark days of polarization of the exploitation of people's fears by cynical, power-hungry leaders. Where does our faith take us? Psalm 37 is David's advice in his old age. He's seen it all and done a lot of it. According to the psalm, ultimately the wicked and evildoers will not be rewarded. So I guess we can take some comfort in that. But still we watch as the hospitality code is turned on its head. Women and children first has become the answer to the question, whom shall we sacrifice? Who are the most vulnerable, the least able to defend themselves against executive orders? The Beatitudes have been tossed out the window. In fact, we seem to have an administration which is reading selectively from the wisdom of Solomon in chapter 2. For they reasoned unsoundly, saying to themselves, come therefore, let us enjoy the good things that exist. Everywhere, let us leave signs of enjoyment, because this is our portion, this is our lot. Let us oppress the righteous poor man. Let us not spare the widow or regard the gray hairs of the aged. But let our might be our law of right. For what is weak proves itself to be useless. Don't be surprised if you hear this Bible quote during a White House briefing. So we need a word of comfort. We need a word of sustenance. We need a word of reassurance. In the midst of this darkness, I feel like I need a nightlight. If for nothing else, just to make sure when I'm stumbling around in the dark, I don't hurt myself or avoid doing anything useful. So we need a nightlight. Do not fret. Do not be tempted. Do not waste your time because of the wicked, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. But commit your way to God, who will make your vindication shine like the light and the justice of your cause like the noonday. In our little corner of this great country that we love, let us not waver in addressing the forces of ignorance and fear. And on Wednesday, when we gather for barbecue and beer and fireworks and baseball, let us affirm our freedoms in the Bill of Rights. The freedom to practice my religion, not the freedom to discriminate against others. The freedom to speak freely, not the freedom to spew hate and lies. The freedom to assemble to protest unjust policies, not the freedom to wear hoods and carry torches. The freedom of the media to investigate and report the news, not the freedom to manipulate information and manufacture lies. The freedom to own a gun if I choose to, but not the freedom to own an arsenal with no regulation. The freedom and responsibility to vote. The freedom to take a knee at a football game. So let us recover our sense of the common good. so much a part of our faith tradition, our responsibility to and for each other. But also let us reclaim the notion of patriotic. We are patriots. And with that, renew the meaning of liberty and justice for all. Because it is the gospel that calls to us. Remember, Jesus sends us out like sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, and have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. It is the Psalms and the prophets that sustain us. Blessed are those who trust in God. They shall be like a tree planted by the water. In the year of drought, it is not anxious and it does not cease to bear fruit. Let us bear fruit. Let us continue to bear fruit. The fruit of hope and justice. And let us remember that hope has two mothers: anger and courage. May God bless us with an abundance of both. Amen.